Hello, welcome to Go Library. This is Dr. Ming. Today, I invite Ben Rogers, founder of Hong Kong Watch, to comment on the Chinese Communist Party CCP's National Security Law for Hong Kong. Hello, Ben.
Hello, good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. Thank you. According to you, why did the CCP still pass the National Security Law for Hong Kong, regardless of serious warnings issued by the US, the UK, EU, and the international community?
I think there were several reasons. Firstly, it's clear that the Chinese Communist Party regime cares more about exercising its total control, repressing dissent, and protecting its power domestically than it does about either its international reputation or indeed about Hong Kong's financial viability. And it also cares more about its own power than about promises that it has made in the past. I think there were maybe three specific reasons for the timing. The first is obviously it was deeply alarmed by the protests over the last year, and it wanted to act to prevent that continuing. Secondly, I think they took advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic, thinking that the rest of the world was focused on that and maybe that they'd be able to fast track this through without too much reaction. I think hopefully they're proven wrong on that point. But thirdly, I think they were also deeply shocked by the district council elections last November, where the pro-democracy parties won such an overwhelming majority, and there was a clear sense that the pro-democracy movement would do very well in the legislative council elections planned for September this year. And I think Beijing wanted to do whatever it took to prevent that happening, and so it's imposed this national security law on Hong Kong without even going through the pretense of going through Hong Kong's legislature, and it's imposed it with alarming speed, more or less a month from the time that it announced it to the time that it's now in place, and it's the worst, most draconian law that I think I've ever seen. It exceeded even our worst fears.
Which aspect of the national security law for Hong Kong concerns you the most, and why?
Well, I think every aspect of it is equally concerning, and of course the impact on people in Hong Kong is going to be most serious. So the implication that I think the thing that is particularly alarming is that the terms are not defined or very vaguely defined. So the concepts of secession, subversion, collusion with foreign political entities, and terrorism are defined in very broad terms in the way that the Chinese Communist Party defines them, not in the way that most open societies would. So, for example, terrorism, nobody would disagree with the idea of countering terrorism as long as it's properly defined. But my concern is that they may regard protesters as terrorists, in inverted commas, those who express any form of criticism or dissent from the Chinese Communist Party may be charged with subversion. Those who simply talk to a foreign activist like myself, or a foreign human rights organization, or foreign parliamentarians or journalists could be in trouble. So that's one thing that concerns me. Another thing that I think is very alarming is the extraterritorial application of the law in Article 38 that says that even non-Hong Kongers who are outside Hong Kong can be regarded as breaking this law. So theoretically, in the last week or so, when I've been giving media interviews, as am now with you, as I've written opinion pieces, expressed my criticism of this law and of the Chinese Communist Party regime. Theoretically, I may be in breach of Article 38, but even more ridiculously, almost the entire British Parliament, the European Parliament, the US Congress, the American President and Secretary of State, the British Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, and others theoretically are in breach of the law. That's obviously ridiculous and can never be enforced, really. But what I think is much more dangerous about this is particularly for ethnically Chinese or Hong Kong people who are foreign citizens, who may be involved in activism in the countries where they are living. If those countries have extradition agreements with China, or if those individuals travel to countries that have extradition arrangements, they could be in very dangerous situations. So that is deeply concerning. And then, of course, the enforcement powers that have been granted to the Hong Kong police following the implementation of the law are terrible. Being able to search people's homes without warrant, being able to stop people leaving Hong Kong, being able to intrude into internet communications. Those are really, really terrifying powers. So the whole thing is awful. I've just highlighted some of the worst elements of it.
Anshin Chen announced her retirement from political movement, and 3 leaders of Demosisto resigned too. What could be the real reasons for their moves?
I think I don't want to speak for them, but I think they realized that what was coming. They made these announcements in the days before the law was actually imposed, but they realized that what was coming was going to be exceptionally dangerous. One of the worst parts of this law, I should have said a moment ago, is that it has the potential to impose life imprisonment for certain breaches of this law. And so individuals like the people you mentioned, who've been very prominent, very courageous, realize that they could be in grave danger under this law. They may still be in grave danger, but they obviously were taking precautions. Anson Chan, for a mixture of reasons, including some personal reasons, which I fully understand and sympathize with. Joshua Wong has made it clear that he's going to stay and continue to do what he can, but he realized that his particular political organization could be affected by the law, and so disbanded that. So I think it's very tragic, but very understandable precautions that they've taken.
On the 1st of July, the first day of the security law taking force, 380,000 Hong Kongers went to the street to protest. 330 have been arrested by the police. What's your view about the protest and the arrests?
Well, the protests were extremely courageous, as the protesters have been over the course of the last year or more. And to take to the streets on the day that this new draconian law is in force was an incredibly brave thing to do, and it sends a powerful message that Hong Kongers may have to change some of the ways they do things, but they're certainly not giving up, and they're registering their opposition to this. The arrests and some of the police brutality were predictable. They were similar to the horrific police brutality that we've seen throughout the last year or so, and very concerning, and especially those who, not all the arrests, of course, were under the national security law. The majority of the arrests were under other existing laws, but there have been a number of arrests that day and in the subsequent days, specifically under the national security law, for simple things like holding a banner that talks about independence, or carrying a banner on a motorbike that had now a banned slogan, so it was an immediate illustration of the regime's crackdown.
On the same day, the UK government announced a bespoke citizenship route for Hong Kong BNOs. How could the government make such a drastic policy response so swiftly?
Well, I think, firstly, I really welcome the government's announcement. It's one of the things that I've been calling for, and Hong Kong Watch has been calling for some time. My only criticism of the government is that I wish the British government had acted not only on BNOs but on the Hong Kong situation as a whole much sooner, because I've been warning of the erosion of Hong Kong's freedoms for increasingly over the last 5 or 6 years, and I think that if the UK had done more at an earlier stage, maybe we might not be in this situation now. But nevertheless, it was a courageous and a very welcome move. And I think the reason they did it was that it was absolutely overwhelmingly clear that the Chinese regime had flagrantly breached the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and Britain knew that it had to respond proportionately. It had to offer some protection for those who do have these or who are entitled to the BNO passports, and the fact that they made that offer to all 3 million people who are eligible was very very welcome. The only thing I would add is that it's not the only thing that the British government should do, and I think that this kind of offer and the wider offer that I'm calling for a lifeboat rescue program to help coordinate with other countries to help young political activists who don't qualify for BNO, people who are born after 1997, who will be in grave danger under this security law, and I think that's needed. But that response of helping people to flee Hong Kong may well be a necessary one, and we should be prepared for it, and we should be making that offer. But it shouldn't be the first response. It should be the last resort, and we should also be looking at what measures can we put in place to really maximize pressure on the CCP regime to think again, or at least ensure that the regime pays the highest possible price for what it's done, and that we scrutinize the situation in Hong Kong and keep the focus on Hong Kong very, very strongly.
And the US Senate and House passed the Hong Kong Autonomy Act to sanction responsible CCP officials and banks. How helpful would it be to Hong Kong?
Well, I think that's one of the kind of measures that I was alluding to in my last remarks. I very strongly support targeted sanctions. I think it's really important that we target sanctions as carefully as possible on those who are responsible for this situation and for serious human rights violations and breaches of international law, not against the people of China or of Hong Kong. So as much as possible, these sanctions should be targeted on individuals and entities that are part of the CCP regime and that are responsible for this crisis. Of course, President Trump also has announced that Hong Kong's special trading status with the United States will be reviewed and presumably changed. That's a very it's an announcement that I never wanted to see, on one sense, because I don't want Hong Kong people and Hong Kong businesses to suffer. But on the other hand, I can see the logic behind it, because that special status was there because Hong Kong itself was supposed to have special status, special autonomy, and Hong Kong's autonomy has been dramatically destroyed by the National People's Congress imposition of this law. And so if Hong Kong is no longer autonomous, Hong Kong is effectively being ruled directly by the CCP, then one has to ask, why should it have special trading status? So I can see how the United States has ended up with that. But as I say, as much as possible, the measures should be targeted, and I welcome the Hong Kong Autonomy Act.
Do you think the allies should follow suit and impose similar sanctions as well?
Yes, I do, very much so. The British government has announced its package of Magnitsky-style targeted sanctions to be applied to a range of countries around the world. It made its first designations, which don't include China, but I hope very much that the UK will apply these new measures to the Chinese regime and people in the Hong Kong government and police force who are directly responsible for serious violations of human rights. And I hope others, Canada, Australia, the European Union, European member states, and other countries will do the same.
We know that the CCP is arresting and killing Hong Kongers. What actions can the international community take the soonest to rescue Hong Kongers from such arresting and killing?
Well, I think I've advocated a combination of three broad measures, which I describe as punitive, diplomatic, and rescue. So the punitive measures are the kind of sanctions that we've just been discussing. The diplomatic measures would include the establishment of a United Nations special envoy or special rapporteur, or both, to really scrutinize and monitor the human rights situation in Hong Kong, report to the UN and mobilize all the UN mechanisms. And then thirdly, the rescue package that I've just described of not only the help for BNOs, but a lifeboat program to help non-BNOs who may need to flee. I think there are some other things that we should also be doing in addition to those three. Those are the three headline issues. But I think, for example, we should be ending extradition agreements with not only with China if we have them, but with Hong Kong itself, because we should not now be extraditing people at grave risk to Hong Kong under this new law. We should be looking seriously at removing honours that have been given from, for example, universities to people like Carrie Lam and others in her government who have been complicit with this whole situation. We should question whether British judges should continue to sit in Hong Kong's court as they do currently, especially when they're not now able to sit on national security trials, and when the judiciary in Hong Kong is going to be seriously undermined, and a range of other steps that we should be looking at. I think I would say the last thing that's really important is that Britain should mobilize a coalition of like-minded countries around the world. I've long been advocating for an international contact group, because it's really important to coordinate these efforts so that you don't have countries acting in a single piecemeal kind of way, but actually in a concerted, coordinated effort that will have maximum impact on the regime in Beijing.
Cardinal Zen and Jimmy Lai stated that they will stay in Hong Kong in spite of risking incarceration. Given Hong Kongers' determination and bravery, are you expecting a large number to exodus?
Yes, I mean, I can't predict what the numbers will be, but I think there will be three types of reaction among Hong Kongers. There will be those like Cardinal Zen and Jimmy Lai, who are people of just amazing, inspiring courage, and who will stay, and I worry deeply about the fate that awaits them, but I admire their courage. Secondly, there will be people who, for very understandable reasons, will go quieter. I mean, either stop their activism altogether or potentially continue the movement, but in much more subtle, creative indirect ways. And then thirdly, there will be people who will flee. We've already seen some, including some high-profile people, and I think we will see more. I can't predict how many that there will be, but I think we will see both activists who are in danger, escaping because of that danger, but also just ordinary Hong Kongers who have lost hope in a future in a city that was one of the freest, most open cities in Asia, and is now under this appalling draconian repressive rule. There will be Hong Kongers who just don't see a future for themselves, even if they're not political, and will decide to leave as well.
Last Sunday, the 5th July, Boris Johnson was reported to make a policy U-turn to block Huawei in revenge for China's threat related to Hong Kong, as stated by the Express. What is your view?
Well, the official announcement is still to come, but all the media speculation and the parliamentary pressure indicates that I don't think the British government can at all continue with the deal that it was planning to go ahead with as recently as the beginning of this year. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. The Hong Kong situation is, of course, uppermost in that, but I think also there's been a wider rethink of the relationship with China because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the regime's, the Chinese regime's repression of the truth at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think there are new security considerations. It's reported in the media that our intelligence agencies are reassessing and coming to the conclusion that Huawei may well not be something that could be managed from a security point of view, and therefore in national security terms it shouldn't be part of the 5G network. I think there's been continuing pressure from our allies, particularly the United States, Australia and others. And I think there's been a growing body of opinion in Parliament that has been making it very clear that actually Parliament will not vote in favour of the legislation for this deal. So all these factors combined, I think, have created a situation where the Prime Minister, I hope, we'll have to see what he officially announces, but I hope and believe from the media reporting that he recognises the need for a complete rethink and reversal on this.
On the 6th July, Hong Kong police force will be authorized to conduct searches at private properties without a warrant, restrict suspects' movements, freeze their assets, intercept communications, and require internet service providers to remove information. Is this gravely dangerous? It's
horrendously dangerous. I mean, I'm pleased to see some of the announcements since this announcement. Some of the announcements by Facebook and Twitter and Google that they will not hand over data to the Hong Kong authorities. I hope they stick to that, and I hope they watch this situation extremely closely. But these powers are totally sweeping, and they undermine both daily freedoms, but also the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary. To not have safeguards like the requirement of a warrant to search people's homes is outrageous. And so, yes, it's an extremely dangerous situation.
Yeah, and you're quite right. Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Google, and Telegram have all said they are pausing cooperation with requests for user information from the Hong Kong police, but Apple and Microsoft have not announced a change in policy yet. So what are your thoughts?
Well, you're right to say they haven't announced a change in policy yet. I hope that they will do, and I don't think I would comment further on their position until their position becomes clear. But I hope that they will follow the example of Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, and Google, and do the right thing.
Hong Kong schools have been told to remove books that violate the security law as police powers extended. So what is your view?
Well, this is yet another appalling, immediate effect of this law on dramatically destroying Hong Kong's basic freedoms. I mean, Hong Kong was handed over to China on the principle of one country, two systems, of Hong Kong's way of life being protected, Hong Kong's freedoms being guaranteed. And within hours of this new law, those promises have been completely broken, those freedoms completely shattered. And for something as simple as books in libraries, I mean, that is a direct threat to freedom of expression, to academic freedom. Sooner or later, there will be implications for press and media freedom, and it's extremely alarming.
What else would you like to say to Hong Kong people?
Well, I think I would say that I feel really heartbroken to see what has happened. I lived in Hong Kong for the first 5 years after the handover. At that time, one country, two systems was working pretty well. I had fairly positive hopes for the future of both Hong Kong and for that principle of one country, two systems. And to see things lost in this way so dramatically, less than halfway through the lifespan of the Joint Declaration and the one country, two systems principle, which was supposed to stay in place for the first 50 years from the handover. So it's supposed to be there until 2047. We're less than halfway through. To see that so destroyed in this way is heartbreaking. I would say to Hong Kongers, I think two things. Firstly, they continue to have my deepest and most profound admiration for their courage and creativity. I mean, we've seen it even in the last few days that after certain slogans were banned, Hong Kongers adopted new slogans that seem relatively harmless, like "We love Hong Kong," and those slogans which are on the surface innocuous, but convey a meaning that everybody understands, or even people holding a blank piece of paper to illustrate the fact that they can't write slogans, and the police even telling them that a blank piece of paper may be a breach of the national security law, which is just ridiculous. So I really convey my deep admiration for Hong Kongers in this, my continued solidarity, and I just want to promise them that even if we are now in a period where they can no longer speak out as they would wish to in their own city, or may have to do so in more subtle and creative ways, or maybe taking a very, very huge risk indeed if they do speak out. Even if that is the case, I will continue to speak out totally freely from the safety of London, and use. I always remember I worked for many years on the struggle for freedom in Myanmar or Burma, and Aung San Suu Kyi's famous phrase when she was under house arrest was, "Please use your liberty to promote ours," and that's what I will continue to do for Hong Kong, even if Hong Kongers face greater risks in doing so.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.